Welcome to the second episode of the Godzilla Stompathon Retrospect. Today we're diving into one of the many sturdy foundations of the entire Godzilla franchise that's helped build this series. Before we go any further, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with any episodes that are coming out, because this is going to be a lengthy series that's going to be running for some time. So, let's get started. Today's movie we have Godzilla Raids Again, or in the 1959 re-edited dubbing, which is known as Gigantus the Fire Monster. I don't know what's with that title, it's a little bit more lame, but that is essentially the English version, which is inferior. So this movie, I do want to say, it's between a rock and a hard place, very much. So what I'm trying to say, this movie is right in between the larger movies that are just more monumental than Godzilla Raids Again, or just two movies with a stronger legacy, being the original, and of course the following movie we will talk about, which is King Kong vs. Godzilla. So this deals a follow-up question. Does this mean that Godzilla Raids Again should be dismissed? Because absolutely not. While this is weaker than the previous entry, and as I said, King Kong vs. Godzilla, it is remembered for being a landmark movie that added an important formula that is within the Godzilla series. After all, where would we be without this iconic Godzilla versus method, which has been applied to practically every movie since Godzilla Raids Again? The only movies where they usually abandon this idea would be the movies where they reboot the series and focusing on reintroducing a new incarnation of Godzilla. And there's only been maybe like 2 or 3 movies where they've done that. But really, when they gave us this first concept, there really was no going away from it, because it just became extremely popular. Even if you're not a Godzilla fan, you just know two people in rubber suits are going to duke it out, and you're going to love it. And we just didn't get any kaiju. We've got one of the most beloved kaiju of all time, Godzilla's trusty sidekick. However, though, Anguirus for its introduction was not Godzilla's ally, but in fact, he was his first enemy. So let's start talking about the actual movie, shall we? Before I recorded this, I made sure to watch the Japanese cut of the movie, just because I feel like the Japanese cut, it really brings out the best of this movie. And that's just generally how it is for a lot of these Godzilla movies. The English version tends to dumb things down for the Western audiences. Now, I understand, yes, it's much easier if you don't understand Japanese to sit back and watch the English version. But if you ever have a moment, watch the Japanese cut and make sure you read those subtitles and kind of think about and digest the context of what they're talking about. I want to apply this idea across the board to all the Godzilla movies. It's up to you, though, if you want to pull through with it. One key scene I really take away a lot from this movie has got to be the meeting scene after they realize that there's another Godzilla and Anguirus has been sighted. There's just a bit more to digest and take away, and it feels like this is where the political side of it is applied the most, and we get a few familiar faces that show up. But outside that, though, this movie plays on a bit more of romance, and it kind of dials back the political tone as it goes on, and it's kind of just lost. So there's certain changes that you will see in this movie versus the original one. If you were to ask me, is this movie even somewhat as compelling as the original? I can't say honestly. There are times where it really just kind of loses my attention, and I really look forward to just seeing Godzilla and Anguirus battle. That's about it. I do want to point out that this movie had rushed production likely. So let's take a look at the fact that Godzilla 1954 came out in late 1954. Meanwhile, this movie released in April of 1955. I mean, Godzilla movies were just in high demand. Only a year later, we saw the King of the Monsters cut of the original movie come out in 56. 3 years later, we have the English cut of Godzilla Raids Again, or Gigantus the Fire Monster, whatever it's called. I don't watch that one that often. I really don't care for the title of that one that much. Let's just be honest with ourselves. Godzilla Raids Again just sounds cooler and is much simpler. One positive I gotta say, this movie does not take long for Godzilla to rise again. It's pretty quick. I mean, we have a little search party going on in the beginning, and next thing you know, we have Godzilla and he has some company with him, and they're doing battle. So I want to reflect on something. I talked about this movie being key in introducing a key formula. So here's the thing. The battles in this movie weren't crafted as well as what we knew them in the Showa era later on. So if you watch this movie for the first time and you're expecting some really cool battle sequences, crazy stuff, not really. This movie is kind of slow. The battle scenes, you can tell that they just are not as well crafted. The best is yet to come as far as that goes. I will give some of these movies a pass due to the fact that the suit, let's say for example in the last movie, was like 220 pounds. Imagine the heat of doing all those retakes. This suit was much slimmer. It needed to be slimmer because it required a bit more action and movement. But as you can tell, the battles still seem hindered and it just kind of doesn't pick up the pace as well as some of the other movies. So to remedy this issue, they just made sure to speed up the battles, so it kind of has a bit better pacing, but it still comes off as kind of awkward though. But again, this is early on. I do understand that I think the ultimate goal for this movie was to make sure the fight scenes were realistic, and by realistic, what we're going for is kind of how bears do battle, you know, kind of a slow, kind of territorial, you know, not a lot of just punching and kicks and a lot of crazy stuff that we saw in the Showa movies later on. But basically we have Anguirus, who is another kaiju who's awakened by nuclear weapons after they were tested. So the basic premises of the original movie is not lost. That is one thing I applaud about this movie. It makes sure to go forward. It just felt a little bit less than the last movie. This time we basically have Anguirus, who is basically a giant Ankylosaurus. I guess a mutated version that just has a few distinctive various differences, such as lacking that nice club on the tail, but you know, the design of Anguirus works, even though this design isn't as compelling as the later design. Yes, that 70s design is the absolute best. That is my favorite. Another thing I do come to appreciate about this movie, it makes it perfectly clear the Oxygen Destroyer cannot be used again. So it stays true again to the message of the ending of the first movie, that they cannot recreate it. Something worth noting that I enjoy about this movie, and maybe just me overlooking into this film, but I like how even in the safer, calmer moments, it reminds the characters that the risk of Godzilla and his impending landing is very real, even when it is not happening, even when they feel safe. The danger and the threat of Godzilla is constantly around them. Just kind of mirrors, you know, that kind of old idea, you know, where basically people were, you know, worried about the impending threat of another nuclear threat. I don't know, maybe I'm just overlooking at it, but it was always a lot of fun putting these movies underneath microscopes and kind of thinking about what was going on in history and what kind of things they were trying to tie into the movie that was going on in real life. But yes, I like that touch in the movie. So while it has these calming and romantic tones, people are just trying to live their life, they're still in danger. It's still around the corner, and now danger exists not in the form of one kaiju, but two. I should also point out that one thing I like about the Japanese cut is the sound effects are way more consistent, because in the English version, the sound effects of Anguirus are just all over the place. Even in place of Godzilla's roars, I don't know what's going on there, but it just really makes that version even more lazy and gives me more of a reason to just flat out loathe that version. I do want to mention also it's around the 38-minute mark that was the first time we actually get a decent fight scene between Anguirus and Godzilla. Now, here's the thing, there is one prior to it, but it's really not much to really see other than seeing two monsters on screen for the first time. But the biggest thing is, I don't feel like Anguirus should have been killed off so quickly, because there's still a lot of movie by the time he's killed off. And I feel like after he's killed off, the attention from me just kind of drips for this movie. The tone in this movie is a lot less serious. It has moments where it kind of has that serious tone, but again, like I said, romance, and it kind of replaces it with a little bit of charm, even after a moment right after the damn town was destroyed. So that was just something that kind of bugged me, but this movie is just, it's not as lighthearted as later Godzilla movies would be soon, but it's definitely drifting towards a different direction slightly. Overall, Godzilla Raids Again is far less compelling than the original. I don't believe this movie's ending gives off the max payoff that it could, but it does leave Godzilla alive, at least this version, for future installments, and there's just a lot more to come. This is one of those movies that you don't necessarily need to see to understand the entire franchise. Yes, this movie did introduce battles, and Anguirus was introduced for the first time, but I don't consider it the movie that really spiraled his popularity. Here he was just kind of the extra, the feature, you know, the one that's kind of like the step stool in this movie, because Godzilla is the main focus. But it's not like they took the time to name this movie Godzilla vs. Anguirus and invest a lot of time in Anguirus and give him more screen time. He was just basically there for Godzilla to kill. So, as wrestling fans would say, a heel. Kind of push Godzilla as a heel, so that way Godzilla could be even more of the bad guy. Hey, I'll tell you what, you be the judge of this movie and check it out for yourself. Both versions if possible. Does this movie have importance in Godzilla history? Yes, absolutely, but there's more compelling material that is on its way, because get ready for the next review as we dive into a brand new era for both Godzilla and even King Kong. Let's go!